back, everybody. It is the Working Brother back at you with another talk after some hardcore technical difficulties with Matt. Matt, welcome back.
Thank you. I think hopefully those technical issues will be resolved and it won't happen again. But if it does, we'll roll with the punches.
Yeah. Bottom line, your internet was attacked by your government. That's what I'm going with. We stopped at monopoly money and the fake money system and how China basically can collapse the U.S. immediately if it wants to.
If it wants to.
You want to take it from there?
Yeah, I was playing around with the idea because China has a much better idea of American authentic capitalism than Americans do at this point, which is an amazing irony of history. I find it almost in some ways pathetic, in some ways hilarious. I do get some pleasure around the irony that China's success is based on a more thorough understanding of what made the U.S. originally a viable country. And whenever you look at American leaders who tend to get killed, I already brought up the example in the last episode of Alexander Hamilton, who innovated the idea of a productive credit system by transforming the useless debt that was unpayable into productive debts. So he transformed the character of the debt into an anti-inflationary debt. Because if a debt is just sitting there accumulating interest, doing nothing, the what's going to happen to the buying power of the dollar? It's obviously going to lose value. That'll be inflationary. As debt increases, the monetary the capital increases, but there's no real qualitative increase of the real economy. So that's inflationary. But anti-inflationary debt is different because it's tied to activities that are going to increase the food production, the industrial output, the education, the dignity, like even immaterial moral concepts like dignity, freedom of the individuals. It'll increase the capacity for self-direction of the nation.
That sounds to me like you're trying to counter the trope that all these Chinese investment banks, where they're set up in all these developing countries, quote unquote, where the Chinese are building them ports and whatever, are just debt traps. Is what we've been hearing for forever. So what you're saying is they're not really debt traps in the traditional sense because they also repay people in dignity?
Well, they repay in so many ways, but it's exactly, you've identified it correctly. Yeah, they're not debt traps in the sense that China has, if you're simply a mathematician, like a mathematical economist, you might say, oh, U.S. investments into Africa are on similar levels as China's. Mathematically, that would be a true thing to say as far as numerical magnitudes. But numbers are a really good way to hide lies. Like there's this guy who wrote this book called How to Lie with Statistics, who said, a well-placed statistic can do more damage than Goebbels' big lie.
And as someone who's studied economics and finance and has an idea of how statistics is used, I took a class statistics, and you can use statistics, as you say, to portray whatever it is you want. And if people are not paying attention to all the parameters of the statistics as well as the sample size and whether it's a random sample, to start with, statistics can mean a lot of things. Yeah, definitely. How to lie with numbers.
Yeah, that's like Biden is saying, the Biden White House is saying that they have the greatest economic growth in American history right now. There's more jobs that have been created in the last 2 years under Biden than in all American history, apparently. And it's but if you look at the parameters around which they select those, how they define new jobs, I mean, these are people who are working 4 or 5 jobs and are still not making what they were making when they were working in their former job, 20 years ago in a automotive factory in Detroit that no longer exists. And now people have to do Uber once a day, sell drugs. I mean, as drug legalization is becoming more like normalized, even people who are formerly doing dealing with narcotics. That's becoming part of the what's being calculated as GDP, is drug profits. Like there's so many things. People who have stopped working in the labor market. If you've just like stopped looking for a job after 90 days, you're no longer considered somebody who is unemployed. You're like you're not considered. So there's so many things like that. But they could just, like you just said, they could play with the parameters to make the untrue seem true. And the reality is America is collapsing at a faster rate than ever before. But you wouldn't think of it if you were just a mathematician. So back to China. On Africa, if you look at qualitatively, where is the money going? And you could see Jason Ross and Hussein Askari had done this wonderful debunking of the China debt trap myth. And they did this, I'll send you the email to their essay where they wield their statistics so well. And they do like a pie chart showcasing like the American investments into Africa. And it's of course like mostly into just mining interests primarily. That's all, like extraction of loot. None of it benefiting the actual people living in Niger. Like Niger supplies something like 30% of the energy for the nuclear power sector of France, which is like 70% nuclear. But the vast majority of people living in Niger have no electricity. So how does that make sense? Nigeria too, or any of these countries. So China's different. They do have mining interests. Yes, they're not angels. They need, like, it's called doing business, but they're doing a different kind of business because they're actually investing in manufacturing, like indigenous manufacturing for the Africans. They're investing in building up financial hubs so that Africans can own African banks rather than them having to rely upon Western banks. And also when you look at the types of the debts, they're very reasonable. Like there's no conditionalities to restructure your government around good governance best practices of the IMF or the World Bank. In China, they're like, here's the money. Get the conditionality is get the project done. That's the conditionality. And so, and then they get criticized by George Soros front groups like the Human Rights Watch or something, or the NED rights organizations, because they say, oh, well, China does bribes. They engage in the practice of bribing contractors in Africa or politicians to get their projects built. And it's like, well, first of all, virtue signaling to the extreme, like everybody's doing that. Number two,
no, they're not. They're getting kickbacks. They're not like it's totally different, man. It's totally different.
But that's why nothing gets done, right? Because you have it's been under the idea, this virtue signaling idea, that we are so good that we will not do a bribe of a poor country's leader in order to build a project. We're gonna make sure that, in fact, none of the money we give to Congo or some other country, none of it's gonna go to any of its infrastructure until they satisfy all the conditionalities on our list, involving reorganizing their entire government around a Western-directed civil service, signing on to contracts with Goldman Sachs and De Beers and Anglo-American Company for things that are going to be centuries of slavery. That's already been the case. These were companies that were brought online, like De Beers and Anglo-American, when Cecil Rhodes was alive and creating these things over a century ago. They're still the primary instruments looting Africa of their actual wealth and giving none of it back. Whereas China is saying, okay, well, sure, if your practice, because their policy is don't tell any nation how to do their business, and generally let everybody find their own pathways to getting the job done. The difference between us and China is China wants to get things done. So they want to build things that are ultimately going to have the effect of doing what they've been doing. Like, you got high-speed rail being built up in Africa. You got Ethiopia building the Addis Ababa Djibouti Railway. You got Kenya building the Mombasa Nairobi Railway. That's going to be connected up into Ethiopia. That's going to be going west into Sudan and north into Egypt, that China has already invested and signed contracts in doing these things, as well as the transcontinental railways across Africa. There's three of them east-west and six of them north-south. No, sorry, six of them east-west and three of them north-south, as part of the Africa Agenda 2063 program that China and Russia has endorsed. And they're already begun. It's already like started. And the Westerners who are like eating up a lot of the anti-China debt trappery garbage, they just don't know. Their ignorance allows them to like just suck in all of these made up lies, which is Freudian projection mostly, of just saying that China is doing the sorts of things that we've already been doing for like 100 years to Africa. They're like, it's just now projecting what we do to Africa onto China, where the evidence is actually showing us a very different picture if we cared to look at it, which most people unfortunately don't.
I like your humor. Subtle, but it's there. Yeah, rarely do people actually go look at any evidence. I want to ask you about murder organ harvesting vans in China. Isn't China evil? You're here like spewing like Chinese propaganda. So I'm back at you with some Western propaganda. Like, tell me about your take on Chinese organ harvesting vans.
Well, the sourcing for this comes from one peculiar, strange group that was literally created synthetically in 1992. It came out. It didn't exist before 1992. Under this fellow named Li Hongzhi, who sort of came out of nowhere as a self-professed intergalactic messiah who was brought here to save humanity from intergalactic alien forces, some from our dimension, some from other dimensions.
I think we talked about him last time a bit.
I think we might have, yeah.
Yeah, I think we covered him, and he was the Falun Gong leader, right?
Yeah, and he got kicked out of China. He got kicked out because he developed about 60,000 followers from 1992 to 96, 97. And it largely acts as a bit of a Scientology cult with rites of initiation. And he somehow was able to get his many hundreds of his followers, maybe it was in the thousands, to go and block up the streets of Beijing because China didn't approve of their religious practices that denied for blood transfusion. It's like there's Jehovah's Witnesses. Like there's Jehovah's Witnesses have a weird thing where they think that your spirit, your soul is in your physical blood. And that if you get infused by blood, let's say you've been in a car accident, you're bleeding out and you need a blood transfusion, you're going to have like less of your soul. And thus you won't make it into the kingdom of heaven when you die. Than if you just are allowed to like die and just bleed out, then you'll be pure. You'll be a pure blood, thus pure soul, as if those two things are somehow commensurate. And you'll be able to get into heaven.
You're prompting me to go into coast to coast territory, coast to coast AM.
Yeah, if you want to.
You know that they say that people who get transplants from, other people, like liver transplants. Oh, did we lose you again? We lost you again. No way. We lost you again. Oh, you're back. You're back?
I'm back.
Are you back? Are you back?
Am I back?
You're back. I think you're
I'm
back.
back.
Yeah,
Can you
you're
hear me?
back. Yeah, I can. Yes, I can. All right, that was close. Maybe we shouldn't talk. Maybe we shouldn't talk about transplanted organs. But yeah, the point is,
go ahead. Yeah.
People who get transplants, like kidney transplants and like hand transplants and whatever, apparently they acquire some of the tastes and skills of the donors. Like, for example, people have been known to like pick up a language ridiculously easily after getting an implant from somebody else's body part, and develop taste. Like they never liked beer, for example, or they never could stand peanut butter, and then they have uncontrollable craving and liking for peanut butter or beer or whatever. So as far as the Jehovah's Witnesses, maybe they're onto something. I don't know, man. But anyway, back to the Chinese Jehovah's Witnesses.
No, I mean, it's an interesting point, and we could weave it back in, because I'm like a fan of epigenetics. I don't believe in the Darwinian model of natural selection. I think it's more politically motivated, and it doesn't satisfy explaining the properties of what we could observe in the behavior of new species emerging. How species
define
interact.
epigenetics while I type it out and look it up.
It's an approach to looking at evolution. But not just evolution, also the transmission of information, genetic information of a living organism into the progeny, into the next generation. Not simply random mutations of DNA on a small level, but rather macro attributes that could be also tied to the more macro properties. Like even if, let's say, for example, here I was born with a collarbone that has like a weird ridge in it. I don't know if you can see that ridge. Okay. No, you can't really see it. But there's a ridge there. This other collarbone is fine. Now, I never had a broken collarbone. I never got injured in my collarbone. But my father, when about 2 years before I was born, he fell down a soccer stadium and broke his collarbone at that exact moment, at that exact spot. And for like, he was in a cast before I was born for like a whole year. It was a nasty break. There's a lot of cases of children that I've seen who are born with no fingers if their fathers had years earlier lost their fingers in an accident. There's cases like that. There's been cases where I've seen it described how our emotional states as well are affected by the emotional environment of the mother. Maybe even the circumstances of like trauma that a mother would have experienced, or a grandmother would have experienced that could be passed on into the very fabric of our material substrate, which is something that we then have to deal with, in future generations. Luckily, we have free will and we can self-reflect and get on top of these things. But these are dynamics that are there for humans, and we see that I think you couldn't avoid bringing this into your calculus in thinking about, well, what are the factors shaping why certain species cease to be, what causes them to evolve in a certain direction, in geological or evolutionary time. So all that to say, what you've brought up with the organ, the emotional attributes that occur when you receive an organ transplant, I find to be very interesting. I'd like to know more, but we're so primitive at our stage of understanding of these things. That it's hard to speak too much about it, except to observe and just accumulate all of the anomalies until somebody actually bothers taking a more scientific method to figuring out, well, why is Darwin wrong and what's a better system that could account for these anomalies and much more on top of it. All that to say, I don't think it means you're losing your soul.
Why is Darwin wrong? There's a lot of books about that. One of which is Forbidden Archaeology. It's like right here on a shelf. I can show it to people. It's a really good book. Highly recommended. Let's see if we can do this. There we go. Highly recommended book. Oh, it's censoring it because there we go. Okay.
The Hidden History of the Human Race. Okay, that's fun. That's a fun book. Yeah.
Highly recommended. Let's go back to both of us. There we go. Darwin. What a joke. There's so many things that we could open up with that can of worms.
That could be a whole show unto itself. We could just do a Darwin special, or an anti-Darwin special. But what we can do, so back to the Falun Gong thing. What I've noticed is that just like the Jehovah's Witnesses, they equate as equivalent your blood and your organs with your soul and spirit. It's the same thing. Now, I'm not saying that what you've just said is not true, but I'm saying that having the increased aptitude to develop a language that was held by that person who had the heart that you've been transplanted into, I don't think that means your soul is contaminated, but that the heart somehow had an imprint of some of the attributes of that person. That's an interesting thing to think about.
It's the idea basically that goes back to the fact that, like, the phrase gut feeling, as in like your gut instinct. They've discovered that the brain actually is connected to the stomach, and that there's actually like parts of the stomach that are like part of the nervous system, and that affects you. So that there is an actual gut feeling that you do get, number one. And number two, on a wider scale, basically it says that your imprint of your personality and like your psychology and whatever is not only focused in your brain, but is spread out throughout the nervous system, including those parts which are in the organs that were transplanted. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, it has sort of that holographic universe idea too, that the whole is imprinted upon all of the parts within the whole in varying degrees, right? There's nothing, and so you could see this both used for good or for evil. But I think the facts do back that thesis up, that and for those who actually believe in a loving, reasonable creator God, the idea that we're made in God's image, but that God as a creative force created a creation that has imprinted within all parts of creation an element of the cause, is a very important idea for the most potent scientists, who, like Benjamin Franklin or Johannes Kepler or Leibniz, the people who made the really revolutionary big discoveries in science. If you read their writings, they all had that concept, and so there was this lacking of a dichotomization of the objective outside from the subjective inside universe. That's not something that they had a problem with, because they recognized that it's like what we're saying about capitalism and the overly simplistic capitalism and overly simplistic opposite communism. Are you still there?
Yeah. I'm still here.
Yeah, I'm just all paranoid. My internet's going to shit out of me.
So you are paranoid, huh?
I guess I am. Yeah. I let it get out of it. But it's the same sort of thing where we're told either you have to be a believer in cold rules and mechanical truths in the external objective universe that are going to do what they do in a cold way, and you could know them through mathematical descriptive formula. Or you could be somebody who believes in subjectivity only, where the rule.
Okay, now we seem to have lost you. Okay, maybe we shouldn't have tempted fate. Let's see if we can get him back on. Oh, did he move? No, doesn't look like it. Oh, yes, you're back now.
Yeah.
Are you back now?
Yeah.
Are you back now?
Yeah, I'm back.
Kind of, but you're still frozen.
You can hear me though, right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sure,
but you're still frozen.
That's okay.
Let's see if you maybe it'll come back. Oh, there you go. You're coming back slowly. There you go.
I got a screen.
There you go. You're in slow motion.
That's okay.
Shout out to the Canadian government and your internet provider.
Yeah, right. Video. All right. Okay. Well, I'll try not to move too much to not confuse people visually and audibly.
All right, now it seems to have stabilized. It might be somebody in your house who's just like downloading stuff and like hogging the bandwidth.
My wife, I don't think, or my cat might be doing it. I don't know, but I think we'll see. I don't know. Like I said, I'm in farm country, so the internet signal is not always.
And as he says that, it cuts out again. All right, I don't know if he'll be back. Might be his cat. We were going to get into things, but I think this will be maybe a short little Working Brother Talks. Let me play some music for you all. Thank you for sticking around. Check out Buy Me a Coffee. Thank you to everyone who's already bought something. And we'll be back.